Sorry for my voice, I'm a little under the weather today. So I'm going to show you how to use primitives in Mesh Boolean in Bambu Studio or Orca Slicer to make a slot on the back of something so that you can hang it on a nail or a screw. The screw I'm using is going to be a drywall screw, and it has a 8.5 millimeter diameter head and a 3.5 millimeter diameter shank. So to start off with, on the left side of the software where it says process, I switch it from global to objects just so I can more easily deal with my assemblies. And I'm going to need 4 different primitives. 3 of them are built into the software, 1 we're going to make ourselves. So I'm going to right click the plate, add primitive, I'm going to add a cube. Right click, add primitive cylinder. Right click, add primitive, I need a cone. And then lastly, I'm going to right click, add primitive, and I'm going to add 2 more cubes. These 2 more cubes are what I'm going to use to make my 4th shape. So I'm going to make sure the 2 cubes are not in an assembly. They need to be separate parts to start off with. So I'm going to right click each cube and I'm going to center them so that they're perfectly overlapped. And then with one of them highlighted, I'm going to use the rotate tool, and I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees. So if you grab it and you go over each one of these, it's going to lock in. So I'm going to lock it in at 45 degrees. Now I'm going to click the cube that's still flat to the bed. I'm going to go up and click scale. I'm going to make sure uniform scale is turned off, and I'm going to drag it in the X and Y direction because I'm going to use that as a cutting tool. Next, I'm going to hold Control on the keyboard and click both parts. I'm going to right click and merge. And now with it highlighted, I'm going to go up to Mesh Boolean, difference. Make sure delete input is checked. Now for the subtract from, I'm going to click the triangle. For the subtract with, I'm going to click the other body, and I'm going to click difference. This is going to give me my 4th shape that I'm going to work with. So I'm going to need multiples of each one of these shapes, but these are the 4 shapes I'm going to be using. So I'm going to go over this one that's just called assembly now. I'm going to click it a few times until it actually lets me rename it, and I'm going to name it triangle. So now I have a cube, triangle, cone, and cylinder. So for the first part, I'm going to make the actual opening. So I'm going to need 2 cylinders. So I'm going to copy and paste 2 cylinders in. And I'm going to need 1 cube. So I'm going to copy and paste 1 cube in. So to start, I'm going to click the upper one, the upper cylinder. I'm going to do scale, and I'm going to scale the X and Y to be the size of the head so the head can slide through it. The head of my screw is 8.5 millimeters in diameter, so I'm going to add 1.5 millimeter to both of my diameters for my shank and my head. So it's going to be 10 for the head, 5 for the shank. So the X and Y of this cylinder needs to be 10. And then the Z needs to be 2, because that's how far into the part it's going to cut. So that's going to be my first one. Now this is going to be for the shank, so I'm going to scale this one to 5 by 5 by 2. Make sure uniform scale is off. And now for this cube, I'm going to scale it. The X is going to be the width of the shank, so that's going to be 5. The Y is going to be how long I want the slot to be, so I'm going to make that 20. And the Z is going to be the height, so the same Z as the other 2. And now I have the basic parts. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to align them all perfectly using the move tool and the world coordinates for each part. So to start off with, I'm going to right click each one of these 3 parts and I'm going to center them so that they're all in the same spot basically. Now the way the world coordinates work, so if I click on this rectangle and I click move, which will tell me it's world coordinates, the point it's talking about is the exact center of all 3 dimensions. So if it's 2 millimeters tall, the Z is going to be 1, right? Now, for the X and Y, the middle point is the origin of it. So the part goes 10 millimeters up and 10 millimeters down, 10 millimeters left, 10 millimeters right. So if I want to get something directly on the center up here, I need to add 10 millimeters to their Y world coordinate. So for example, I'm going to click on the bigger cylinder. So I'm clicking on the bigger cylinder right now. And if I want it down here, and they're currently in the same middle point, I need to subtract 10 from the Y. So I'm going to change this 128 to 118. And then I'll move it down so it's perfectly aligned with the very end. It's basically right here, but on this side. I'm going to do the same thing with the other cylinder, but I'm going to add 10, so it's going to be 138, and it's perfectly at the end of it. So it's perfectly aligned right now. I'm going to hold Shift, drag the box over all of it, right-click, and merge, so they're all in one assembly. And now to make the part that's going to sit on top of this, that's actually going to be the empty cavity. Mine's going to be actually relatively big because my screw head has a taper, so I'm going to make mine 3 millimeters. But if yours is going to be on a different type of screw or you need to do something different, go ahead with that. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the assembly, copy and paste it, and then in the assembly I'm going to go to the smaller cylinder and the cube. So for the smaller cylinder, I'm going to highlight over here in this left menu for objects. If I try to click it just on this, it's going to highlight the whole assembly. So you need to click it in these objects area. So I'm going to click the smaller cylinder. I'm going to go up to scale, and I'm going to scale the Z to 3 and the X and Y to 10. This will keep it perfectly at the end, so I don't need to do the world coordinates again, but it's going to make it the bigger diameter because this is going to be the empty area on the inside. I'm going to make the other cylinder 3 tall, just like I did the first one. And then for the cube, I'm going to make it 3 tall, and then the X to 10. That'll make it so it's the opening that's going to be above the slot, right? So I'm going to name this cavity. I'm going to name this one. Come on, it never works for me. Opening. So I know that this is the cavity, this is the opening, right? So now that I have these two done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click each one of them, and I'm going to do Mesh Boolean. It's going to merge all of the parts together, so now they're just two pieces. They're not separate parts that are just in an assembly. And I'm going to work on the next part, which is going to be at the top of the opening. I want to make a slight taper so that it prints without any like little hang downs, you know? To do that, I'm going to copy one of these triangles and 2 of the cones. And I'm going to make them the same dimensions as this larger one. So I'm going to click on the triangle. I'm going to do scale. It's going to be 10 in X, because that's the same as the width of this. It's going to be 20 in Y, because that's the same length I used for the rectangle that was in the middle. And now for Z, I like to do no less than 1/5 of the width. So if the width is 10 millimeters, I'm going to make the Z 2 millimeters. Now, for the 2 cones, I'm going to scale them, and they're going to be the size of the circles at the end, but with the same height as this triangle. So 10 by 10 by 2, 10 by 10 by 2. They're going to go in something like this. Now what I'm going to do is the same world coordinate thing. So I'm going to click each one of these 3 parts, and I'm going to center them. Over here on the left side, I'm going to click the move tool, and it's going to be the exact same dimensions. So to move it to the end of this, I'm going to need to add 10 to this, so it's going to be 138. The other cone, so I'm going to go to the left side and click it. I need to switch it to 118. And now it's perfectly aligned. I'm going to highlight all three parts by holding shift and dragging, right clicking and merging. Now I'm going to right click it again and click Mesh Boolean. Now I have my third part, and I'm going to name it taper. So now I have all three parts and I need to assemble them. So first I'm going to assemble the opening and the cavity. So I'm going to right click center, right click center. And now while I'm highlighted on the cavity, these are centered, I'm going to highlight both the opening and the cavity over here in the left menu. I'm going to right click and merge. So now they're in the same assembly. Now you can tell which one's with by when you highlight it. It'll, like I highlight this bottom one, it's going to be the opening because it's smaller, not as tall, right? So I want to highlight the upper part, which is going to be the big section. I'm going to go to move, and as I said, it's going to be the exact center of the part. So it's a 3 millimeter tall thing, so the Z is 1.5. The part I need to set it on top of is 2 millimeters thick. So the top of it's 2 millimeters. So I need to take the Z, which is the center point of the object, and I need to increase it by 2 millimeters. So it's going to be 3.5 millimeters, and that'll set it directly on top of the other part. You can only do this when it's an assembly. If you try to do it while it's not an assembly, these two parts, this top part that I just lifted up will just drop directly back down to the plate immediately. For example, if I went over to this part and I tried to move it up to 3, it's going to move it up to 3 and instantaneously move it back down to the plate. So, back to this. You can see they're not aligned, and that's because the top one is actually a little bit longer than the bottom one. And to fix that is I need to move the top one in Y over the difference in the diameter between the two circles, because that's what changed, was the diameter of the circle. So if the difference of the diameters is 5, right? So it's actually going to be the radius, so it's going to be 2.5, and then I want to move it half of that. I know it sounds weird, but I'm going to change this Y dimension to 129.25, and then I'll line it up perfectly. I'm not the best at explaining things, so I'm sorry about that, but it's basically you have the difference between these two center points is just the diameter of this, so the radius of this. So the radius of this one is 5. Or 2.5. The radius of this one is 5, right? And then I need half of that number of the difference for the amount I'm moving. So if this is a 5 radius and this is a 2.5 radius, the difference is 2.5. Then I need to take half of that number, and that's the number I'm moving. So 1.25. So now they're perfectly aligned. I'm now going to center this assembly, center this, and I'm going to now highlight the assembly in this left side and highlight the taper by holding Control and clicking both. Right click and merge, so now they're all together now. I'm going to take the taper, I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to move it up so it sits on top. So I'm going to take the 1 that's already there, and then the new height of this is 5. So I'm going to do 1 plus 5 is 6. It sits perfectly on top. Now I'm going to right-click the assembly, Mesh Boolean, and now it's all one piece. This is what I'm going to use as the cutout tool. Now I'm going to just set it where I kind of want it. So if I right-click my part, I always look from the bottom, and I make them different colors, at least for this part, just so I can see them. I'm going to center both things. So I'm going to center this and center this. This is why I make it a different color, so I can kind of see it. I'm going to use the move tool to move it to kind of where I want it for the hanger to be. Now I'm going to click both. So I'm going to click Needs Hanger and the assembly. Right click and merge. Go to this blank slot, which is going to be the hanger. And I'm going to name it hanger, if it would let me name it. There we go. hanger. Right click the word hanger while it's in an assembly with the needs hanger. I'm going to do change type and negative part. What this does is, say this part that I wanted to put a hanger on is a multicolored print. By doing it as a negative like this, instead of meshing it together, I can have the hanger on the back and not mess with the colors. If I Mesh Boolean it, which is another option I have, it would model it so I could export the STL with it, but it's going to get rid of the color information. Now when I slice it, it'll do the cutout, and I have a cutout of the part. If I use this slider on the right side, I can drag it down so I can show you that it cut it out. And that's it. Have any other questions? Let me know. Have a good one.